By the time you reach my age, you learn not to expect too much. That sounds sad, I know, but it isn't. It's survival. Expectations have a way of breaking your heart when they're attached to people you love, especially family, especially children, especially sons. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 71 years old. I live alone in a small brick house on the east side of Savannah, Georgia. The house isn't fancy. The paint on the shutters peels every summer. The porch creaks when the weather changes. The kitchen window sticks every winter. But it's mine, every inch of it. And after everything life has taken from me, there is comfort in owning something nobody can take away. For years, my son Daniel had been my entire world. When his father died unexpectedly 23 years ago, Daniel was only 16. I worked two jobs to keep food on the table. I cleaned offices at night. I worked at a bakery before sunrise. I skipped meals more times than I can count. Not because we didn't have food, because I wanted him to have enough. I never told him that. Mothers rarely do. We simply smile and say we're not hungry. Then we watch our children eat. Daniel grew up. I went to college, built a career, bought a beautiful home in one of Savannah's wealthiest neighborhoods. The kind of neighborhood with iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges. The kind of neighborhood where people wave from luxury SUVs. The kind of neighborhood where I always felt slightly out of place. Still, he was my son, and I was proud of him, even after he married Vanessa. Especially after he married Vanessa. At least I tried to be. Vanessa was beautiful, smart, elegant, the kind of woman who looked expensive even when she wore simple clothes. Everything about her seemed polished. Perfect hair, perfect nails, perfect smile. The problem was that her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. I noticed that on the day we met. Mothers notice things. We always do. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she was shy. Maybe I was being overly protective. But over the years, small things began to pile up. The little comments, the forgotten invitations, the holiday gatherings where I somehow learned about the plans after everyone else. Nothing obvious, nothing I could point to, just enough to make a person feel unwelcome. Daniel never noticed, or maybe he chose not to. I still don't know which hurts more. Then, one Tuesday morning, my phone rang. I nearly dropped my coffee reaching for it, because Daniel rarely called. Most communication comes through text messages these days. Hey, Mom. The sound of his voice immediately made me smile. Daniel, we're having lunch Sunday. My heart lifted. Really? Yeah, just family. I cannot properly explain how happy those words made me. Just family, not a holiday, not an obligation, not a birthday. Just family. For the rest of the week, I found myself looking forward to Sunday. It felt ridiculous, like a teenager preparing for a date. But when you spend most of your days alone, small invitations become big events. Saturday afternoon, I baked Daniel's favorite pie, apple cinnamon. The same recipe my mother taught me 50 years ago. The same pie I made for every birthday he ever had. The smell filled the house. For a few hours, it felt like the old days, back when life was simpler, back before grief, back before distance, back before people became strangers while still sharing your last name. Sunday morning arrived bright and warm. I woke before sunrise, pressed my nicest blouse, curled my hair, applied lipstick, the same rose colored lipstick I'd worn for years. Then I carefully wrapped the pie. It looked beautiful. Golden crust, perfect lattice top. I smiled as I placed it on the passenger seat beside me. 3 hours. That was how long the drive would take. 3 hours there, 3 hours back. 6 hours total. For lunch. Some people would call that crazy. Mothers call it normal. The drive felt peaceful. Spanish moss hung from old oak trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches. The radio played softly in the background. I spent most of the drive thinking about Daniel as a little boy, his first baseball game, his first school play, his first broken heart. The years seemed to disappear. For a moment, I forgot how distant we'd become. For a moment, I simply felt like his mother again. The restaurant was beautiful, much fancier than anywhere I would normally go. Valet parking, crystal windows, fresh flowers near the entrance. The kind of place where every meal costs more than my weekly grocery budget. I parked farther away and carried the pie carefully. The hostess smiled politely. "Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting my son." I gave Daniel's name. She checked her tablet, then smiled. "They're already seated." I followed her through the dining room. People laughed over expensive lunches. Wine glasses sparkled under soft lighting. Everything looked elegant, perfect. Then I saw them. Daniel sat near the center of the room. Vanessa sat beside him. Several members of her family filled the table. Everyone looked relaxed, happy. For one brief moment, my heart warmed. Then Vanessa noticed me, and everything changed. Her smile disappeared instantly. The entire atmosphere shifted. I felt it before a single word was spoken. The hostess stopped beside the table. "Your guest has arrived." Vanessa stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. The sound echoed across the restaurant. Every conversation nearby seemed to pause. Then she pointed directly at me. Not at the hostess, not at the pie, at me. Her finger felt like a weapon, and in a voice loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, she shouted, "I don't want this old woman here." The room went silent. Every fork stopped moving. Every conversation died. I stood frozen. The pie suddenly felt heavy in my hands. I looked at Daniel, waiting, praying, hoping. Surely he would say something. Surely he would stand up. Surely he would tell his wife to stop. Instead, my son lowered his eyes and said absolutely nothing. That was the moment my heart truly broke. Not because Vanessa screamed, but because Daniel stayed silent. And as the entire restaurant stared at me, I realized something was about to happen that none of us could have imagined. Because at that exact moment, someone from across the room had heard every word, and he was already walking toward us. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the room had become. Not ordinary quiet, the kind of silence that settles over a place when everyone realizes they're witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing. Vanessa stood beside the table, breathing heavily. Her finger was still pointed at me. The hostess looked frozen. Several diners had stopped eating entirely. A waiter carrying a tray stood motionless near the bar. And through it all, my son sat there, silent, looking down at the table. I wish I could tell you that Vanessa's words hurt the most. I wish I could tell you that being publicly humiliated by my daughter-in-law was the worst moment of that afternoon. But it wasn't. The worst part was watching my son avoid my eyes. Because when a stranger hurts you, it's painful. When family hurts you, it's personal. But when your family watches someone else hurt you and says nothing, that's a different kind of wound entirely. I tightened my grip on the pie dish. My hands trembled, not with anger, with disappointment. The deep kind. The kind that settles into your bones. Vanessa crossed her arms. "I don't know who invited her." The words echoed through the restaurant. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Even her own parents looked embarrassed. Her mother lowered her eyes. Her father stared into his water glass. But Vanessa seemed completely unaware. Or maybe she simply didn't care. She looked at me the way someone looks at an inconvenience, a problem, something that shouldn't be there. I glanced toward Daniel again, still muffing. Not a word, not a defense, not even a simple, Vanessa, stop. Nothing. For a moment, I considered turning around and leaving. It would have been easy. Walk back to my car, drive 3 hours home, cry where nobody could see me, pretend this never happened. A younger version of me probably would have done exactly that. But something kept my feet planted. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe exhaustion. I was tired of being the one who always left quietly. Vanessa finally looked toward the hostess. Can you please remove her? The hostess blinked, clearly uncomfortable. I'm I'm not sure. She's not part of this lunch. The words hit harder than she probably intended. Not part of this lunch. Not part of this family. Not part of their lives. The message was clear. I opened my mouth, not to argue, not to defend myself, just to speak. But before I could say anything, a calm voice interrupted. Is there a problem here? Everyone turned. The voice belonged to a man in his late 40s, tall, well dressed, confidence. He moved with the kind of quiet authority that instantly changes the atmosphere in a room. The moment the staff saw him, their posture changed. Waiters straightened. The hostess visibly relaxed. Even customers nearby seemed to recognize him. Vanessa looked annoyed, as if he had interrupted something important. The man stopped beside our table. His expression remained calm, professional. But there was something else in his eyes, something sharp, observant. He looked at Vanessa first, then Daniel, then me, then the pie, and finally back to Vanessa. What's going on? Vanessa immediately smiled, the kind of smile people use when speaking to someone they think matters. Oh, nothing serious. The man didn't respond. She continued. This woman wasn't invited. Woman. Not my mother, not family, not Evelyn. Just a woman. I watched the man's expression carefully. Something changed, very slightly. Almost impossible to notice, but I saw it. His eyes lingered on me for a second longer. Then he looked at the pie in my hands. His expression softened, only for a moment. Then it disappeared. I'm sorry, he said politely. Who wasn't invited? Vanessa pointed at me again. This old woman. Several people nearby visibly winced. The man remained silent. Then he slowly turned toward Daniel. Sir, is that true? Daniel finally looked up. The entire restaurant seemed to wait for his answer. My heart pounded. This was his chance. One sentence, one defense, one acknowledgement. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, avoided my eyes, and quietly said, It's complicated. I don't know why those two words hurt so much. Maybe because they weren't true. There was nothing complicated about it. I was his mother. That should have been enough. The man stared at him for several seconds, long enough to make Daniel uncomfortable. Then he looked back at me. For the first time since arriving, he spoke directly to me. Ma'am, are you all right? Such a simple question, yet no one else had asked it. Not Daniel, not Vanessa, not anyone. Just him. I swallowed hard. I'm fine. It was a lie. But old women become experts at lying about pain. The man nodded slowly. Then his eyes moved to the pie. You baked that? I looked down. Apple cinnamon. For the first time, a genuine smile touched his face. His favorite? I froze. How did he know that? For a split second, something strange passed between us. Recognition. Memory. Something I couldn't place. The man looked away before I could ask. Vanessa cleared her throat impatiently. Can we please move on from this? The man turned toward her. No. The single word landed like a hammer. The entire room became even quieter. Vanessa looked shocked, clearly not accustomed to being told no. "I beg your pardon?" The man's expression remained calm. "I said no." Something was changing. I could feel it. Everyone could. The power in the conversation had shifted. Vanessa felt it too. Her confidence began to crack. Not much, just enough. The man folded his hands, then asked a question none of us expected. "What is your name, ma'am?" I answered softly, "Evelyn Carter." The moment the words left my mouth, his eyes widened. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. And suddenly I realized something. He knew exactly who I was. The realization sent a chill through me, because I had never seen this man before in my life. Or at least, I didn't think I had. He stared at me for several seconds. Then his entire expression changed. Shock, recognition, emotion. The kind of emotion people struggle to hide. And before anyone at the table could understand what was happening, before Vanessa could speak again, before Daniel could ask a question, the man took a step forward, looked directly into my eyes, and quietly whispered a single word: "Mom." The entire restaurant froze. The entire restaurant froze. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. The word hung in the air. Mom. A simple word, a powerful word, a confusing word. Vanessa blinked. Daniel stared. The hostess looked completely bewildered. Several diners exchanged confused glances. I couldn't move. I stood there clutching the pie dish against my chest, trying to understand what had just happened. The man stood only a few feet away. His eyes glistened. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I noticed. Old women notice things, especially pain, especially gratitude, especially love. And for some reason, when this stranger looked at me, I saw all three. Vanessa recovered first. Her voice cut through the silence. "What did you just call her?" The man slowly turned toward her. His expression was calm, but something about him had changed. The professional restaurant owner was gone. Now there was something deeply personal in his eyes. "I called her Mom," Vanessa laughed. A nervous laugh. The kind people use when reality suddenly stops making sense. "That's impossible." The man didn't respond. Daniel finally stood. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Excuse me," he said. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." The owner looked directly at him. "No." Just like before. One word, calm, firm, final. "No misunderstanding." Daniel frowned. "I've never seen you before." The owner tilted his head slightly. "That doesn't surprise me." The answer only created more confusion. Around us, customers openly stared. Nobody was pretending to eat anymore. The entire dining room had become an audience. Vanessa crossed her arms. Her irritation was quickly turning into anger. "Look, this is ridiculous." She pointed toward me again. "This woman is my husband's mother." The owner nodded. "Yes." "Then why are you calling her Mom?" His answer came immediately. "Because she earned that title." The restaurant became silent again. I felt a strange sensation spread through my chest. Not understanding. Recognition. Something buried. Something forgotten. The owner looked at me again. His eyes softened. And suddenly I noticed something familiar. Not his face. Not his voice. His smile. There was something about his smile. Something I had seen before. Long ago. Years ago. Maybe decades. But I couldn't place it. My mind searched desperately through old memories. Church picnics, school events, community gatherings. Nothing fit. The owner took another step forward. Then he smiled. A real smile this time, the kind that transforms an entire face. And suddenly, I remembered. Not the man, the boy. A skinny little boy, dark hair, worn sneakers, always hungry, always polite, always carrying books. My heart skipped. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The owner saw the realization appear on my face. His smile widened. You remember now. I stared at him. My voice barely worked. Michael? The man's eyes immediately filled with emotion. Hello, Mom. A gasp spread across the restaurant. Vanessa's mouth literally fell open. Daniel looked completely lost. Wait. He pointed between us. You know each other? Michael laughed softly. Do you know each other? His voice cracked. Then he looked at me, the same way people look at someone who changed their life. This woman saved me. The words stunned everyone, including me, because I had never thought about it that way. Not once. Not ever. 30 years earlier, Michael had been 13. His father had abandoned the family. His mother worked 3 jobs. They lived 3 streets away from me. Most nights, Michael came home to an empty apartment. I remembered finding him sitting alone on a church bench one rainy evening, hungry, embarrassed, trying not to cry. I remembered offering him dinner, just once, or at least that was the plan. Once became twice. Twice became 3 times. Eventually, Michael started eating at our house almost every week. My husband loved him. Daniel loved him. He practically became family. Then life happened. People moved. Years passed. My husband died. Michael left for college. And somewhere along the way, we lost contact. I looked at him now, this successful businessman, this confident restaurant owner. And suddenly I saw the boy he used to be. The same eyes, the same smile, the same grateful heart. Vanessa shook her head, still trying to regain control. Okay. She forced a smile. That's very sweet. The sweetness vanished instantly, but that doesn't change anything. The room became quiet again. Michael slowly turned toward her. What exactly doesn't change? Vanessa gestured toward me. This is a private family lunch. Michael looked around, then back at her. A family lunch? Yes. Michael nodded thoughtfully, then asked the question that changed everything. If this is family lunch, he looked directly at Daniel. Why was the only person acting like family standing at the door holding a pie? Nobody answered. Not Daniel, not Vanessa, nobody. The truth sat heavily in the middle of the table, impossible to ignore. Michael wasn't finished, his voice remained calm, but every word landed harder than the last. I watched this woman walk through my front door carrying a homemade pie. He pointed gently toward me. I watched her smile when she saw her son. His eyes shifted to Daniel. Then I watched her get publicly humiliated. Daniel lowered his gaze, again, the same way he had before. The same silence, the same weakness. And for the first time, I saw Michael become angry. Not loud and angry, dangerously angry. The kind of anger that remains perfectly controlled. The kind that makes people uncomfortable. He looked directly at my son. When she needed someone to stand beside her, his voice dropped. Where were you? Daniel opened his mouth. I closed it. I opened it again. Nothing came out because there was no answer. None that sounded good. None that sounded honorable. None that sounded like something a son should say. Vanessa immediately jumped in. Daniel doesn't owe anyone an explanation. Michael turned toward her. No, His eyes hardened. He owes his mother one. The restaurant fell completely silent, and for the first time since arriving, Vanessa looked scared. Not because of me, not because of Daniel, because she was beginning to realize something. The old woman she wanted thrown out of the restaurant wasn't who she thought she was, and neither was the man standing in front of her. Then Michael looked back at me. His expression softened again, and what he said next would change the entire afternoon. Mom, he smiled gently. I think it's time everyone at this table learned the truth. And as he pulled out a chair beside him, I suddenly realized he wasn't talking about the past. He was talking about something much bigger, something nobody at that table knew, including me. Nobody sat down. Not me, not Daniel, not Vanessa. The entire restaurant seemed suspended in time. Michael's chair remained pulled out beside him, waiting, but nobody moved. Vanessa looked around the dining room. For the first time since I arrived, she appeared uncertain. That confidence she'd carried only minutes earlier was beginning to crack. People were watching, not casually, not politely, watching, judging, listening. And Vanessa knew it. The problem with humiliating someone in public is that the public sees everything, not just your victim, you. Michael folded his hands calmly, then looked directly at me. Would you sit with me for a minute, Mom? The words still felt strange, familiar, comforting, confusing. I slowly placed the pie on a nearby table, then sat beside him. My knees felt weak. Not from age, from emotion. Across from us, Daniel remained standing, Vanessa too. Neither seemed sure what to do anymore. Michael glanced around the room, then smiled. You know something funny? Nobody answered. When I was 13 years old, I used to dream about eating lunch in a place like this. Several customers nearby leaned closer. Even the waiters appeared interested. Michael laughed softly. But back then, I couldn't even afford lunch. His eyes found mine. And that's when she found me. The room became silent. I already knew where this story was going, but Vanessa didn't. Daniel didn't. Nobody did. Michael continued. My father left when I was 9. His voice remained steady. My mother worked every job she could find. Double shifts, night shifts, weekends, anything. He smiled sadly. But sometimes hard work still isn't enough. I remembered those years. I remembered seeing his mother exhausted beyond words. I remembered seeing Michael sitting alone, hungry, quiet, embarrassed. The kind of embarrassment poverty teaches children too early. Michael looked toward the ceiling briefly, as though replaying old memories. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting outside St. Mary's Church. I smiled. I remembered, very clearly. I hadn't eaten since the previous day. A few people in the restaurant shifted uncomfortably. Michael laughed softly. You know what I was doing? Nobody answered. I was pretending to read. The restaurant chuckled. Even Daniel managed a weak smile. I figured if people thought I was studying, they wouldn't realize I was sitting there because I had nowhere else to go. Then he looked at me, and this woman walked over. My chest tightened. I remembered every detail. The rain, the cold, the book in his lap, the hunger in his eyes. Michael smiled. She didn't ask questions. She didn't make me feel ashamed. She didn't give me a lecture. He paused. She just asked if I liked meatloaf. The restaurant laughed again. I couldn't help smiling, because that was exactly what happened. Michael pointed at me. That meal changed my life. Vanessa rolled her eyes slightly. She thought the story was ending. She thought this was simply some sentimental memory. She had no idea. Michael wasn't finished, not even close. I ate dinner at her house that night. His eyes moved toward Daniel. You remember that, don't you? Daniel nodded slowly. I think so. You think so? Michael laughed. I practically lived there. The laughter spreading through the restaurant grew warmer, more relaxed. For a few moments, the tension eased. But Michael's expression soon became serious again. Most people think success comes from talent. He shook his head. That's not true. His eyes locked onto Vanessa. Success comes from people. The room became quiet. The right people. Then he looked back at me. When I wanted to quit school, she wouldn't let me. When I wanted to drop out and work construction, she wouldn't let me. When I got rejected from college, she drove me to the admissions office herself. I stared at him. Memories flooded back, thousands of them. Small moments, forgotten moments, moments that seemed insignificant at the time, moments I never imagined someone would remember. Yet Michael remembered every one. The room was completely silent now, because people were beginning to understand. This wasn't a story about charity. It was a story about belief. Michael's voice softened. My own mother loved me, but Evelyn believed in me. Tears threatened to form in my eyes. I looked away. Old women cry easily, not because we're weak, because we've collected too many memories. Michael continued. When I opened my first restaurant, his smile widened. It failed. The room laughed. So did my second. More laughter. The third one nearly bankrupted me. Then he pointed around the restaurant, but this one survived. His expression became emotional. This one became successful. His eyes returned to me, and before opening day, I called her. I blinked, then suddenly remembered a phone call years ago. A nervous young businessman asking for advice, asking if he was making a mistake. Michael smiled. I asked her if I should risk everything. And do you know what she said? Nobody answered. His smile widened. She said, if your heart is honest and your work is honest, you'll never truly fail. The restaurant became silent. Several customers nodded. Others smiled. Even the wait staff seemed moved. Then Michael looked directly at Vanessa, and everything changed. Because now his voice carried something different. Not warmth. Authority. You screamed at her today. Vanessa visibly stiffened. The room instantly became tense again. Michael raised a hand, not aggressively, simply stopping her. You pointed at her. You humiliated her. You called her an old woman. Every word landed like a hammer. Vanessa's face turned red. Daniel looked miserable. Michael wasn't yelling. That made it worse. Calm disappointment is far more powerful than anger. Then Michael asked a question. One simple question. A devastating question. What exactly have you done to earn the right to disrespect her? Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because there was no answer. Not one. Michael stood slowly. The entire restaurant followed him with their eyes. Then he turned toward the dining room, toward the staff, toward the customers, toward everyone. And he said something that shocked me completely. Everything you see here, he gestured around the restaurant, exists because she taught me how to believe in myself. The room erupted into applause, actual applause. Customers, servers, managers, everyone. I sat frozen, embarrassed, overwhelmed, emotional. The sound filled the restaurant, and for the first time that afternoon, I saw Vanessa panic because she was beginning to understand something terrifying. The woman she tried to throw out wasn't powerless. She wasn't unwanted. She wasn't irrelevant. She was respected, deeply respected, more respected than anyone else in the room. But what Vanessa still didn't know, what nobody at that table knew, was that Michael hadn't even revealed the biggest secret yet. Because hidden inside his office upstairs was something he had protected for 20 years. Something with my name on it. Something he had never shown anyone. And in a few minutes, he was about to bring it downstairs. The applause seemed to last forever. I wanted it to stop. Not because I didn't appreciate it, because I didn't know what to do with it. Most of my life had been spent behind the scenes, helping, supporting, encouraging. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in a restaurant full of strangers. Slowly, the applause faded. People returned to their tables. Conversations resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone still watched, everyone still listened, and everyone knew something important was happening. Michael remained standing, his eyes fixed on Vanessa, then Daniel, then me. Finally, he smiled, a strange smile, the kind people wear when they're carrying a secret, a very big secret. "I'll be right back." Nobody stopped him. Nobody spoke. He simply turned and walked toward a staircase leading to the second floor. Vanessa immediately looked at Daniel. "What is happening?" Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I don't know." For once, he sounded completely honest, because he truly didn't know. Neither did I. Michael disappeared upstairs. The restaurant buzzed quietly. Whispers spread between tables. Waiters exchanged curious looks. Even the hostess looked fascinated. Vanessa sat down heavily. The confidence she'd displayed earlier was gone. In its place was uncertainty. And uncertainty is a difficult thing for arrogant people. They don't know how to wear it. She glanced at me. For the first time all afternoon, there was no hostility in her eyes, only confusion. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The damage had already been done. A few moments later, Michael returned. He carried a dark wooden box, old, carefully polished, the kind of box people use to protect important things. Everyone noticed it immediately. Michael carried it like something fragile, like something valuable. When he reached the table, he placed it gently in front of him. Then I sat down. Nobody spoke. The anticipation was unbearable. Even nearby customers were openly staring. Michael rested his hand on the box, then looked directly at me. "Do you remember my high school graduation?" I blinked. The question surprised me. "Of course." His smile widened. "Do you remember the gift you gave me?" I thought for a moment. Then I laughed softly. "A fountain pen." Michael nodded. "A cheap fountain pen." The restaurant chuckled. It wasn't cheap. It was very cheap. Now everyone laughed, including me, because he was right. I had barely been able to afford it. Michael smiled warmly. "But that's not what I remember." His fingers slowly traced the edge of the wooden box. "I remember the letter." The smile disappeared from my face. The letter. I hadn't thought about that letter in years, decades. I honestly wasn't sure it still existed. My heart suddenly began beating faster. Michael opened the box. Inside were hundreds of papers, photographs, documents, letters, cards, memories, perfectly preserved. The entire restaurant became silent again. Michael carefully removed a single yellowed envelope. Its edges were worn, its folds softened by time. Yet somehow it had survived, protected, saved, treasured, for 20 years. Then he handed it to me. The moment I saw my own handwriting, tears filled my eyes. I remembered it instantly. Every word, every sentence, every emotion. I had written it the night before Michael left for college, back when he was scared, back when he doubted himself, back when he thought he wasn't good enough. Michael looked around the restaurant, then at Daniel, then Vanessa, and finally back at me. You wrote this when I was 18. My hands trembled. The room was completely silent. I carried it everywhere. His voice cracked. The emotion surprised everyone, even me. I carried it through college. He swallowed hard. I carried it during my first business failure. His eyes glistened. I carried it when the bank rejected my loan. The restaurant listened without making a sound. And I carried it when I signed the papers for this restaurant. A tear finally escaped his eye. I've read it hundreds of times. Nobody moved, nobody dared, because something sacred was happening. Michael carefully took the letter back, then unfolded it. The paper crackled softly. He looked at me. May I? I couldn't speak. I simply nodded. Michael cleared his throat. Then I began reading. Dear Michael. The restaurant became so quiet that even the kitchen seemed to stop. If you're reading this, it means you're scared. A few people smiled, because 18-year-olds are always scared, even when they pretend otherwise. Michael continued, That's okay. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. I felt tears forming. The words sounded strange now, older, wiser, almost like they belonged to someone else. But they were mine, written in a tiny kitchen 20 years earlier. Michael kept reading. You may not have money, you may not have connections, you may not have certainty, but you have character, and character will open doors that money never can. The room remained completely silent. Even Vanessa stared at the letter, unable to look away. Michael's voice trembled. One day you'll become the man you're trying so hard to be. And when that day comes, never forget where you started. His voice finally broke. He lowered the paper, unable to continue for a moment. The restaurant sat frozen. Several customers wiped away tears. A waitress quietly sniffled near the bar. Even Daniel looked emotional, because everyone understood something. This wasn't just a letter. It was a life, a relationship, a bond, a legacy. Michael folded the paper carefully, then looked directly at Vanessa. His eyes weren't angry anymore. They were disappointed, which somehow felt worse. You called her an old woman. Vanessa lowered her gaze. Yes, her voice was barely audible. Michael nodded, then held up the letter. This old woman taught me how to survive. He placed the paper gently on the table. This old woman taught me how to believe in myself. Another pause. Then the final blow. This old woman made me the man who owns this restaurant. The words landed like thunder. Vanessa visibly flinched. Daniel closed his eyes. The truth was impossible to escape now. The woman they'd humiliated wasn't weak. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't irrelevant. She was the reason one of the most successful men in Savannah existed. Michael slowly closed the wooden box, then looked toward me and smiled. A genuine smile. A son's smile. There's one more thing they should know. My heart skipped. One more thing? I had no idea what he meant, but the look in his eyes told me this wasn't over, not even close. Then Michael reached into the box again and pulled out a legal document. The moment I saw the signature at the bottom, my breath caught in my throat, because I remembered signing it. and I suddenly realized Michael was about to reveal something that would shock everyone in the restaurant, including me. The moment I saw the document, my heart stopped. Not because I didn't recognize it, because I did, immediately. The paper looked older now. The edges are slightly yellowed, the folds worn from time. But there was no mistaking it. I remembered signing it. I remembered the kitchen table. I remembered the fear. I remembered the decision. And suddenly I wished Michael would put it back into the box. Not because I was ashamed, because some sacrifices are easier to make than they are to explain. The restaurant seemed to disappear around me. The voices, the lights, the people. Everything faded. All I could see was that document, and all I could hear was the memory of a phone call from 20 years ago. A desperate phone call. A young man on the verge of losing everything. Michael looked at me gently, as if asking permission. I slowly shook my head. Not in disagreement, in disbelief. Michael, my voice barely worked. You kept that? He smiled. I kept everything. The room remained silent. Every person seemed to sense that something important was about to be revealed. Michael looked toward Daniel, then Vanessa, then the rest of the restaurant. When I was 26 years old, his voice became serious. I had an opportunity. I remembered. Of course, I remembered. The opportunity had been a small building downtown. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive, just a location nobody wanted. Most people thought it would fail. The bank certainly did. Michael continued. I found a building I wanted to buy. His smile faded, but I couldn't get financing. Several people nodded knowingly. Business loans aren't easy, especially for young entrepreneurs. The bank rejected me 3 times. His eyes dropped briefly. I was broke. I was scared, and I was ready to quit. The room listened carefully, because everyone loves hearing about success, but they become invested when they hear about failure. Failure feels real. Failure feels human. Michael slowly lifted the document. Then she did something I'll never forget. My stomach tightened, because I already knew where this was going, and I hated being the center of it. I hated attention. Always had. Michael unfolded the paper, then looked directly at Vanessa. This isn't a business contract. He paused. It's a mortgage agreement. Several people exchanged confused looks. Vanessa frowned. A mortgage? Michael nodded, then spoke words that seemed to echo through the restaurant. She refinanced her house. The room became silent, completely silent. Daniel's eyes widened. Vanessa blinked. I looked down at my hands because I couldn't bear to see their reactions. Michael continued. After the bank rejected me, after every investor walked away, after everyone told me the restaurant would fail, his voice cracked. She put her home on the line. The words hit the room like a wave. A collective gasp spread through nearby tables. Even the waitstaff looked stunned. Daniel stared at me. His face had gone completely pale. Mom. I still couldn't look at him. Not yet. Michael's voice softened. She used her own house as collateral. The restaurant erupted with whispers. Shock, disbelief, emotion, everywhere. Because people understood what that meant. If Michael failed, I could have lost everything. My home, my savings, my security, everything. Vanessa looked horrified. You risked your house? I finally looked at her and smiled softly. It was only a house. The answer somehow made things worse, because everyone realized I meant it. To me, it truly had been only a house. Michael was family. Family mattered more. The room became quiet again. Michael carefully placed the document on the table. Do you know what she told me when I tried to refuse? Nobody answered. His smile returned, a sad smile. She said homes can be rebuilt. The room remained silent, but regret lasts forever. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. A waitress near the bar openly cried. Even customers who had no idea who we were looked emotional, because sacrifice speaks a universal language. Michael pointed toward me. She believed in me when nobody else did. Then he looked at Daniel, and she never told anyone. Daniel seemed unable to breathe. His eyes remained fixed on me, as though he were seeing me for the first time. I never knew. His voice sounded small, broken. I nodded. Of course not. Why not? The question came immediately, almost desperate. I smiled sadly, because it wasn't about me. Daniel lowered his head. The guilt on his face was impossible to miss. For the first time all afternoon, he wasn't defending himself. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't avoiding responsibility. He was simply hurting. And maybe he deserved to. Michael folded the document carefully. Then I looked around the restaurant. You want to know the funny part? A few people smiled through their tears. The funniest part? He laughed softly. She never asked for a penny. The room became silent again. I offered. He looked at me. Many times. I smiled. You needed it more. The restaurant shook their heads in disbelief. Because in a world obsessed with taking credit, nobody expected someone to refuse it. Michael nodded. That's true. Then his expression changed, became more serious, more emotional, which is why today made me angry. The room instantly grew quiet. His eyes found Vanessa again, then Daniel, then me. You humiliated someone who spent her entire life helping other people. Nobody spoke, because nobody could. The truth was too obvious, too painful, too undeniable. Then Michael stood, slowly, purposefully, and what he did next shocked everyone. He walked toward the kitchen. A few seconds later, every server in the restaurant emerged, one by one, lining up behind him. Managers, chefs, bartenders, everyone. Nearly 30 employees, the entire staff. They stood silently behind Michael. The sight was astonishing. Customers stared, phones appeared, people whispered. Nobody understood what was happening. Then Michael smiled and said something that made my eyes fill with tears. There's a reason everyone who works here knows her name. The room became completely silent. Every employee smiled. Every employee looked toward me, like family, like gratitude, like respect. Then Michael spoke. Because every year, his voice softened, without telling anyone, she pays for our employees' Christmas fund. The restaurant gasped. I closed my eyes. Oh no, not that. Anything but that. I had begged him never to tell people, never. Yet somehow he had found out years ago. And now there was no stopping him. The employees looked emotional. Several are already wiping tears away. One young waitress openly cried because they all knew the truth. Every Christmas bonus, every emergency fund, every hardship check, every anonymous act of kindness. It had come from the woman Vanessa tried to throw out. And suddenly I realized something. The entire restaurant was no longer looking at me with sympathy. They were looking at me with something else. Respect. The kind that cannot be bought. The kind that must be earned. And across the table, Vanessa finally broke. A single tear rolled down her cheek, because she had just realized the full weight of what she'd done. But what happened next would affect Daniel even more than her, because someone from Michael's staff was walking toward us carrying a small photo album. And inside that album was proof that my son had forgotten something important about his own childhood. something that was about to change everything. The photo album looked ordinary, small, blue, worn around the edges. The kind of album people keep in a closet for years. The kind nobody pays attention to until they open it. The young waitress carried it carefully toward our table. Her eyes were red from crying. Several other employees watched from behind Michael. The restaurant remained unusually quiet. Nobody wanted to leave. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Michael accepted the album and placed it gently on the table. Then he looked at Daniel. "Do you recognize this?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Michael smiled sadly. "I figured." Slowly he opened the cover. The first photograph appeared. The moment Daniel saw it, his face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for me to know he recognized it. The photo showed two boys. One was Michael, the other was Daniel. Both covered in mud, both grinning, both holding fishing rods. A memory from nearly 30 years ago. Daniel stared, silent. Michael turned the page. Another photograph, another memory. Daniel and Michael sitting at our kitchen table. Half-finished homework spread everywhere. A plate of cookies between them. My husband is standing behind them, smiling. Daniel swallowed hard. The restaurant watched quietly. Michael turned another page, then another, then another. Every photograph told the same story. Birthday parties, school plays, church picnics, baseball games, Christmas mornings, family dinners, moments. Thousands of moments. The kind people don't appreciate until they're gone. Daniel stared at each picture longer than the last. His eyes grew wetter. His expression grew heavier. Finally, he whispered, "I remember this." Michael nodded. "I know." The next photograph nearly broke me, because I remembered the exact day. Daniel was 11. Michael was 12. Both boys sat on the hood of my husband's old truck, laughing, holding giant ice cream cones. The photograph had captured something precious. Joy. Simple joy. The kind childhood gives us only once. Daniel stared at the image, then looked up at me, and for the first time all afternoon, I saw my little boy again. Not the executive, not the homeowner, not the husband. My son. The boy I raised. The boy who used to run through the yard barefoot. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. The boy who used to tell me everything. The realization seemed to hit him all at once. Years, lost years, missed phone calls, forgotten visits, canceled plans, excuses, distance, all of it. Every decision, every missed opportunity, every moment he could have spent with me and didn't. The weight of it settled across his face. Michael turned another page, then stopped. His expression became serious. This one. His finger rested on a faded photograph. "Do you remember this day?" Daniel looked down. The color immediately drained from his face. Because he remembered. I remembered too, very clearly. The photograph showed a hospital room. Daniel lying in bed. Thin, pale, scared. Tubes attached to his arms. Machines beside him. I felt tears form instantly, because that had been the worst year of my life. Daniel was 13 when he became seriously ill. For months, doctors couldn't identify the problem. For months, we lived in fear. For months, I slept in hospital chairs, prayed in hospital hallways, cried in hospital bathrooms, trying not to let him see, trying to stay strong. Michael pointed toward the photo. "You were in that hospital for 7 weeks." Daniel nodded slowly. His voice was barely audible. "Yeah." Michael looked at him. "And who stayed with you every single night?" The restaurant became silent. Daniel couldn't answer, not immediately, because he already knew. Everyone knew. Eventually, he whispered, "Mom." Michael nodded. Who missed work to stay there? Mom. who sold her jewelry to help pay the bills. Daniel closed his eyes. Mom. The room remained silent. The truth felt heavy, painfully heavy. Michael continued. Who slept in a chair beside your bed for nearly 2 months? A tear rolled down Daniel's cheek. Mom. Nobody spoke, because there was nothing to say. Some truths speak for themselves. Michael closed the album, then looked directly at him. When was the last time you drove 3 hours to see her? The question hit harder than anything else, because there was no anger in it, only honesty. Daniel lowered his head. No answer. Michael waited. Still no answer. Finally, Daniel whispered, I don't know. The words shattered something inside him. I could see it. The realization. The regret. The shame. Not because he hated me, because he'd become distracted, successful, busy, comfortable. The same thing that happens to many people. Life pulls them forward so quickly that they forget to look behind them until it's too late. Vanessa sat completely silent. No interruptions, no arguments, no excuses. For the first time since I arrived, she wasn't trying to control the conversation. She was simply listening, learning, realizing. The restaurant remained focused on Daniel, because everyone could see what was happening. A son was confronting himself, and that's one of the hardest things a person can do. Daniel looked up at me. His eyes were red. His voice trembled. When did I become this person? The question broke my heart, not because I knew the answer, because I didn't. Sometimes change happens slowly, so slowly nobody notices. One missed call, one canceled visit, one holiday was skipped, 1 year, then another, until suddenly strangers share the same last name. I reached across the table, placed my hand over his, the same way I had when he was little, the same way I had when he was scared. It's not too late. The restaurant became completely silent. Daniel stared at me. Then tears began falling freely. Not dramatic tears, real tears. The kind grown men try to hide. The kind they usually fail to. I'm sorry, Mom. The words came out broken, raw, honest. Years late, but honestly. I squeezed his hand and smiled. Because apologies matter, but sincerity matters more. Michael quietly looked away, giving us the moment, giving Daniel dignity. The restaurant watched respectfully. Nobody interrupted, nobody laughed, nobody judged. Then something unexpected happened. Vanessa suddenly stood. Every head turned toward her. She looked terrified. Not of Michael, not me, of herself. Because she was finally seeing her own actions clearly. And the look on her face told me she had something important to say. Something nobody in that restaurant expected, including Daniel, including me. Then she took a deep breath and began speaking. The entire restaurant turned toward Vanessa. No one spoke. No one moved. After everything that had happened, every eye in the room was on her. For the first time all afternoon, she looked completely vulnerable. Not angry, not defensive, not superior, just vulnerable. She stood beside her chair, gripping the edge of the table. Her knuckles had turned white. Her eyes glistened with tears. And when she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, simple, small, yet powerful. Nobody interrupted. Vanessa swallowed hard, then looked directly at me. Not through me, not past me, at me, the way she should have from the beginning. I'm so sorry. The restaurant remained silent, because everyone knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Vanessa took a shaky breath, then slowly sat back down. Her shoulders sagged. Years of confidence seemed to disappear at once. I owe everyone an explanation. Daniel looked surprised. Michael remained silent. I simply listened. Vanessa stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's eyes. When I first met Evelyn, her voice cracked. I already felt intimidated. The admission shocked everyone, including me. Intimidated? By me? I lived alone, drove an old sedan, wore the same coat for years. There was nothing intimidating about me, or so I thought. Vanessa laughed bitterly. I know how ridiculous that sounds. She wiped away a tear. But it's true. The restaurant remained completely silent. I came from a family where everything was about appearances. A few people nodded. They understood exactly what she meant. The right clothes, the right neighborhood, the right schools, the right friends. She looked down. The right image. Her voice grew quieter. My parents spent our entire lives teaching us what success looked like. She paused, then shook her head. They never taught us what a character looked like. The words landed heavily, because they were honest, painfully honest. Vanessa stared at her hands. When Daniel talked about his mother, a weak smile appeared. He always spoke about how strong she was. I glanced at Daniel. He looked confused, as if hearing this for the first time. Vanessa continued. At first, I admired that. Then her expression darkened. But eventually, I started comparing myself. The restaurant listened carefully, because now they were hearing something deeper than an apology. They were hearing a confession. Vanessa looked directly at me. You never seemed to need anyone's approval. I blinked. I had never thought of myself that way. But maybe she was right. At some point in life, age teaches you that chasing approval is exhausting. Vanessa continued. You never cared about status. You never cared about money. You never cared what people thought. A tear slid down her cheek, and I hated that. The room became completely silent. Nobody expected that answer, not even me. Vanessa laughed sadly. I spent years trying to impress people. Years. She looked around the restaurant, this house, the parties, the clothes, the vacations, everything. Her voice cracked again. I thought if people admired me, I'd finally feel secure. She lowered her head, but I never did. Michael folded his arms quietly, listening, watching, waiting. Vanessa took another shaky breath. Then every time Evelyn walked into a room, she looked directly at me. People genuinely liked her. The admissions stunned me because I had never noticed, never even considered it. Vanessa smiled sadly, not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, not because she was important. Another tear appeared, because she was kind. The restaurant remained silent. The words felt heavier than any accusation, because they were true. Vanessa finally looked at Daniel. I became jealous. Daniel stared at her, speechless. I know how awful that sounds. It is awful. She wiped her eyes. But it's true. Years of tension suddenly made sense. The forgotten invitations, the distance, the coldness, the uncomfortable holidays, the subtle remarks. None of it had been about me, not really. It had been about her own insecurity. Vanessa continued. Every time Daniel called her, I felt threatened. The room listened quietly. Every time he talked about her, I felt compared. She laughed softly. The comparison existed only inside my head. Then she looked directly at me. You never competed with me. I smiled sadly. Of course not. Vanessa nodded. I know that now. Silence filled the room. For the first time all afternoon, nobody seemed angry anymore. Not Michael, not Daniel, not even the customers. Because everyone was witnessing something rare. Someone telling the truth, the ugly truth, the uncomfortable truth, the truth that costs pride. Vanessa stood again, then turned fully toward me. The entire restaurant watched. I humiliated you today. Her voice trembled. I embarrassed my husband. She glanced at Daniel. I embarrassed myself. Then she looked around the room, and I embarrassed every person who witnessed it. Tears streamed down her face. But the worst part, she looked directly into my eyes. The worst part is that you still brought the pie. The restaurant became silent again. Emotion swept across the room because everyone suddenly remembered the pie, the homemade pie, the reason I came, the reason none of this should have happened. Vanessa covered her mouth as she cried. You drove 3 hours. You brought his favorite pie, and I treated you like a stranger. Daniel lowered his head. His shoulders shook. Michael looked away. Even he seemed emotional. Then Vanessa did something nobody expected. She walked around the table, slowly, carefully, until she stood directly in front of me. The restaurant became completely silent. She knelt, right there beside my chair, ignoring everyone, ignoring appearances, ignoring pride. And for the first time since she'd entered my life, she took my hand. Her hands trembled. Her voice broke. Evelyn. Not an old woman. Not her. Not her. Evelyn. I don't deserve forgiveness. The room listened, but I hope someday I can earn it. A tear slipped down my cheek, because those words mattered. Not because they erased the past, because they acknowledged it. True apologies don't erase pain, they respect it. I looked down at her. This woman who had spent years building walls. This woman who finally seemed exhausted from carrying them. And I realized something. She wasn't my enemy. She never had been. She was simply a wounded person making wounded choices. The same mistake many people make. I squeezed her hand gently. The entire restaurant waited, holding its breath. Then I smiled. And what I said next would change everything. Not just for Vanessa, not just for Daniel, for all of us. Because for the first time in years, we were finally ready to become a family again. For a long moment, I simply looked at Vanessa, still kneeling, still holding my hand, still crying. The restaurant remained completely silent. Nobody rushed her. Nobody interrupted. Nobody tried to rescue her from the discomfort. Because sometimes people need to sit with the consequences of their actions, not to punish them, to change them. I studied her face. I really studied it. For years, I had seen her through the lens of hurt, the forgotten invitations, the cold greetings, the awkward holidays, the distance, the judgment, the resentment. But now, for the first time, I saw something else. Fear, regret, shame, and underneath all of it, a young woman who had spent years trying to become someone she thought people would admire. A young woman who had forgotten how exhausting that can be. I squeezed her hand, the same way I once squeezed Daniel's hand when he was afraid, the same way my mother squeezed mine. And finally I spoke. Vanessa. Her shoulders trembled. She looked up. Tears covered her face. I forgive you. A collective breath seemed to move through the restaurant. Not applause, not celebration, relief. Pure relief. Because forgiveness is one of the few things that instantly changes a room. Vanessa covered her face and cried harder. Not because she deserved forgiveness, because she didn't expect it. Most people don't. I smiled softly. That doesn't mean today didn't hurt. She nodded immediately. I know. It hurt very much. More tears. I'm sorry. I know. Another pause. Then I leaned forward slightly. But nobody is beyond redemption. The words seemed to settle over the entire restaurant. Because they weren't only for Vanessa, they were for Daniel too, and maybe for everyone listening. Vanessa slowly stood, still wiping her eyes, still struggling to regain composure. Then she surprised me. She walked over to the pie that had somehow survived the entire afternoon, the pie that started this story. The pie I'd carried for 3 hours, the pie Daniel loved as a boy. Vanessa carefully picked it up, almost reverently, then carried it back to the table and placed it directly in front of me. The room watched quietly. I'm embarrassed to admit something. Nobody spoke. She looked down at the pie. When I saw this earlier, her voice cracked. I wasn't angry about the pie. She laughed sadly. I was jealous of it. Several people smiled, confused. Vanessa shook her head. I know how ridiculous that sounds. Then she looked toward Daniel. He talks about this pie all the time. The restaurant chuckled softly. Even Daniel laughed through his tears. Vanessa smiled weakly. I spent years trying to make desserts he would love. More laughter. And every time she pointed at the pie, this thing won. The entire restaurant laughed. I even laughed. The tension finally began to disappear. The heaviness began to lift. For the first time all afternoon, the room felt warm again, human again, family again. Michael smiled from across the table, then looked at Daniel. Well? Daniel blinked. Well, what? Michael pointed toward the pie. Are you seriously going to make your mother cut that by herself after driving 3 hours? The restaurant laughed again. Daniel shook his head. Then something beautiful happened. Something small. Something ordinary. Something powerful. He stood. I walked around the table and took the knife from beside the pie. The same way he used to help me in the kitchen when he was little. The same way he used to stand on a chair beside the counter. The same way he used to steal apple slices before dinner. I felt tears forming again, not because of the pie, because of the memory. Daniel cut the first slice, then handed it directly to me. The room erupted into applause. I laughed through my tears. Michael shook his head. About time. Even Vanessa laughed. The atmosphere transformed completely. Within minutes, slices of pie were moving throughout the restaurant. Employees received pieces. Customers received pieces. Managers received pieces. Even the hostess received a slice. A pie made for one family somehow became dessert for an entire restaurant. And honestly, that felt exactly right. A little later, the crowd finally began returning to normal. Customers resumed their lunches. Staff returned to work. Conversations restarted. Life continued. But something had changed. Not just for us, for everyone who witnessed it. Daniel remained beside me, not across the table, beside me, like he should have from the beginning. Eventually, he turned toward me. His expression is serious. Mom, I looked at him. When's the last time I visited your house? I smiled. You don't want to know. He laughed softly. Then his smile disappeared. I do. I thought for a moment. Almost 11 months. His face fell. 11 months. A son living 3 hours away. 11 months. No visit, no weekend, no effort. The number hurt him more than any speech could. Finally, he nodded. That ends today. I looked at him carefully, not because I doubted him, because I wanted him to understand. Promises matter, but actions matter more. Daniel nodded again, as though reading my thoughts. I know. Then he surprised me. He pulled out his phone, opened his calendar, and began canceling meetings. right there at the table. Michael laughed. What are you doing? Daniel didn't look up, making room for what's important. The answer made my heart swell, because maybe, just maybe, he finally understood. Not success, not money, not status, not appearances. What mattered? People. The people who love you, the people who stay, the people who sacrifice quietly while expecting nothing in return. A few minutes later, Vanessa sat beside me, carefully, almost shyly. Then she smiled. A genuine smile. The first genuine smile I had ever seen from her. Would you teach me how to make that pie? I laughed. The restaurant laughed. Even Michael nearly choked on his coffee. Vanessa rolled her eyes. I'm serious. I smiled. So am I. Then I reached over and squeezed her hand. Next Saturday. Her face lit up, and in that moment, I knew something important. Families don't heal because people are perfect. They heal because people are willing to listen, willing to change, willing to forgive. The afternoon slowly came to an end. Customers left. The staff waved goodbye. The restaurant returned to normal. Eventually, I stood to leave. Michael walked me toward the entrance. Just before I reached the door, he stopped me. His eyes were emotional. Again. Thank you. I smiled. For what? His voice cracked. For seeing something in me when nobody else did. I reached up and touched his cheek, the way mothers do, biological mothers, chosen mothers, any mother. You did the hard work, Michael. He shook his head. No. A tear slipped down his face. You showed me who I could become. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he hugged me, tightly, like a son. And for the second time that day, I heard him whisper, I love you, Mom. When I finally walked outside, the afternoon sun felt warmer. The air felt lighter. The world felt different. Not because my life had changed, because my family had. As I reached my car, Daniel called out. I turned around. He stood beside Vanessa, both smiling. Both are emotional. Both looked more like family than they had in years. Then my son said the words I had waited far too long to hear. Drive safe, Mom. I smiled. I will. He took a step forward. When you get home, I waited. He smiled. Call me. A simple sentence. A small sentence. But sometimes the smallest promises carry the biggest meaning. I nodded. I will. Then I got into my car, started the engine, and began the 3-hour drive home. Only this time, I wasn't leaving with a broken heart. I was leaving with something far more valuable, my family, back where they belonged. And for the first time in years, none of us were strangers anymore. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. If you were Evelyn, would you have forgiven Vanessa after everything that happened? Or do you think some words leave scars that an apology can never fully erase? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about family, sacrifice, second chances, and the quiet strength of people who refuse to give up. Because sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very people who change lives the most. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.